for a short, it's a
Oh,
short
really?
informal discussion, but even when I emailed it to the host, they couldn't get the slides to show. And that's, I mean, out of 100 talks, it's the only time it's happened, but I feel like I have PTSD, you know?
Right. I wanted to make you the co-host, but I didn't have that option, so I just made you the host. So
Okay,
I see
all right.
your face is logging on. Hello, Dr. Bose. Okay, now you just have to put it in presenter's view and you're all ready to go.
I'm ready to go.
Okay, and I already started recording.
Right. So you got the comment about my PTSD on there.
No,
Unless
no,
you'll edit that out.
I think I started the recording after that.
Okay, where are you right now, by the way, Ben? Are you in Florida?
I'm in Fort Lauderdale. I'm in my office. I don't know if I gave you all the details, but I still have funding for 2 more years up in Canada, and I still have my clinical trial to finish. So some of my staff up in Canada will be logging on today. It's been a bit of a challenge, but so far so good.
Okay, well, you're wearing a sweater, so I thought he must be in.
Oh, well, it got cold last night. So we got down cold for Florida. So it got down to 5 centigrade in South Florida.
Yeah, that's cold.
And it might even be, yeah, so the whole week it's been cooler, but they don't have heat in my office, so
Oh,
it's kind of strange. Okay, I see a number of people logging on. We'll start at 1 o'clock Eastern time sharp, so another 3 minutes. Now, Bonnie, usually we have anywhere between 15 to 40 or 50 people. It just depends on the topic and everything else and the time, and if there are any conflicts, you know, with schedulings. I try to accommodate the speaker. I don't always look carefully at all the potential conflicts.
well, my experience is that everybody is getting kind of zoomed out.
Yeah.
And it's, especially if they know you're recording it, it's easier for them to say, oh, I'll watch it later. I don't know if they do. Right. It's certainly, it's understandable. It's a strange existence we have right now.
I just want to double check that we're really recording it. Can you go to your record button and then say record to iCloud?
Yep. Wait a
Not
second.
to your computer, but to iCloud. Then it goes to my account.
Right. I think to do that, I have to stop the share. I can't see my record button in.
It should be at the bottom.
Yeah, I know.
It should be okay, but.
Oh, I think I know what I'm doing wrong. I took my face, my view off the screen. I don't like to look at myself when I'm talking. No, wait a second. Huh. Where did the record button go? It's always there.
Yeah, the PowerPoint record button is different than the Zoom record button.
Yeah. Yeah, I have recorded Zoom talks, so I know what you're talking about. I just can't make it show. I think we're going to have to rely on.
I did hit the button before I passed the baton on to you.
Okay, well, I got the message that it's being recorded, and I actually, well, that's right. That's proof it's working. Right?
Okay, good.
Okay.
Well, just wait another minute, and then I'll introduce you.
Okay, and I'll try to leave room for questions. Will people be entering any questions in the chat line?
Yeah, they usually, some people will do that. Other people will raise their hand and talk to you directly, especially if you have a friend out there or something. So I'll monitor the chat box once you finish.
Okay, I have one other quick question. Can you see my cursor moving around?
Everything looks good.
Why is this not coming at the microphone?
Okay, I have that it's 1 o'clock Eastern time. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our Dementia Journal Club. We're broadcasting live from Nova Southeastern University here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And it's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bonnie Kaplan, Professor Emeritus at the University of Calgary. And she says that she's semi-retired, but I don't believe it because I know she's a very busy lady and she really has quite a few things going on. So today, it's really, like I said, my pleasure to introduce her. So Dr. Kaplan started out her career in the US. She's from Ohio originally. She joined, I guess I'm going backwards, but you spent some time at Butler University, University of Chicago, and Brandeis, and then you had some postdoctoral training at Yale and at the VA hospital. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, very good. But of course, your last appointment where you're still at was at the University of Calgary in Alberta, and it was in the Department of Pediatrics. And then I think you received a secondary appointment in the Department of Community Health Sciences.
That's right.
So Dr. Kaplan has a distinguished 40-year scientific career, and she's really published widely on the biological basis of developmental disorders with reference to mental health. And in particular, she focused on the contribution of nutrition to brain development and brain function. So in September 2019, she has several awards to her credit, but I'll just mention a couple of them very shortly. In September 2019, she was awarded $250,000, $250,000 Dr. Rogers Prize for career contributions to complementary and alternative medicine for all of Canada. So what an achievement that was. And in 2017, she was also ranked one of the top 150 difference makers in Canada for the area of mental health. And then I'll just mention one more. November 2021, she was named one of the top 7 of over 70 for the Calgary area. But that must be a typo because I'm sure you're not that old, right?
Very much so.
Well, in any case, I also want to just point out that Dr. Kaplan has a new book. In fact, I just ordered it on Amazon, but I haven't received it yet. I was hoping to get it soon. And hopefully the next time I see you, you can autograph it for me.
Be happy to do that, Dr. Albensi.
And the name of that book is The Better Brain. And I guess you have a co-author on that book, right?
That's right. And I'll be mentioning her, Professor Julia Ruckledge, who actually was originally a Canadian, or is still a Canadian, but did her PhD with me. And then she moved to New Zealand, where she has been doing research on nutrition and mental health for about 20 years. And so she's my co-author.
All right. Well, I'll just mention the title. I mean, it says it here in the presentation. The title of Dr. Kaplan's talk today is How Magic Bullet Thinking Slowed the Progress of Nutrition and Brain Health Research. So please take it away, Dr. Kaplan.
Thank you. And thanks for the introduction and the invitation. This is a little bit of an unusual audience for me, I believe, because I'm used to speaking mostly to mental health clinicians and to the general public. And I don't very often speak to basic scientists. So I was looking at my title this morning and thinking, you know, magic bullet, thinking about a single nutrient at a time is exactly what we want our basic researchers to be doing, figuring out everything there is to know about what every single nutrient does in every single pathway. So you have to look at my title from the lens of a clinical researcher, which is what I did in my career, which is really looking at how to treat mental health or brain health problems. So my first slide, as always, is just a disclosure slide. I have no commercial interest in any company or the sale of any product, and never have had and never will. That's really important because in mental health, of course, it's quite the opposite. If you're studying medications, people are very tied to the pharmaceutical companies. Okay, why isn't it going there? So this is a little bit of an overview. Again, to emphasize, I'm going to be focusing on clinical research. And some of these issues that I listed here are going to come out more than once. It's not exactly completely linear, but I'm going to be talking about what we all should have learned in elementary school. Why is single nutrient research dominant? What does it really make sense in the scientific world for, again, clinical research? I'll be going over some of the evidence-based, which is really the basis of our book, The Better Brain, the evidence-based from nutrition being extremely important for mental health. And I'll be talking about policy and also a few times mentioning money. So The Purple Cauliflower is our book, but the reason it's on this particular slide is my website is the way to reach me. I'm sure we will not cover everything. I never can in 45 minutes. And there are people who might even have personal questions they want to address to me. There's a contact tab on my website, and I get every single email. So just be sure to include the J, because it turns out Bonnie Kaplan is a common name. So I had to make my website be bonniejkaplan.com. So let's talk a moment about mechanisms and what nutrients do in our brains. In my opinion, this is what we should all learn in elementary school. And I've taught it down to children in the 6th grade. They understand it, they get it. Our doctors should learn it in medical school. And I'm not saying that flippantly. As we discuss in the book, Julie and I have both run into many physicians who said to us, why are you studying minerals and vitamins? They're not very important for the brain, are they? I mean, it somehow doesn't click with them. I'm sure some of brain metabolism is taught in medical schools, but it's not getting through. So here are some elementary points, and I apologize if these are kind of beneath you. Most of you will already know it. Our brain is only about 2% of our body weight, but it represents 20 to 50% of our metabolic demand. So when we are eating, we are primarily eating for our brains more than any other organ. I think if there's a cardiologist in the audience, they might argue with me, because the heart is certainly also a greedy organ. But I think the research shows that our brain is our greediest organ. This is a little factoid that I find really resonates often with the lay audiences I speak to, so I like to mention it whenever I can. Each of us adults has 4 to 6 liters of blood inside of us, and as much as about 1 liter is perfusing our brain every single minute our heart is beating. So you have to ask why that much. I mean, you've all seen, I'm sure, the pictures of the vasculature of the brain, or you've studied it. You know how densely vascularized our brain is. Why is that much of our, almost a quarter, 20% anyway, of our blood in our little tiny 2.2 pound brain at any given time? And certainly it's carrying nutrients, also carrying oxygen. It's also taking away waste products. I don't really think that nutrition is the explanation of everything in the world, but I want to talk about the nutrients that it's carrying. So one of the things that I teach, and again, I know that most of this audience knows this, but I'm trying to explain to you in a way how to talk to your patients, clients, or your sister or brother. Brain metabolism is not a complicated concept. You can explain to the lay audience that it's the transformation of one compound to another. So if you have to get chemical A converted to chemical B, most of our conversions involve enzymes, and these enzymatic reactions require cofactors. The word cofactor should be in every elementary school curriculum. People don't know what cofactors are. And when I was in training, we called them coenzymes, but now it seems like they're usually, sorry, is someone speaking to me? No, okay. Maybe if you could mute your mics, I'm hearing some noise in the background occasionally. Thank you. So cofactors, of course, rest upon minerals and vitamins, and I'm going to be using the term micronutrients to refer to minerals and vitamins. So that's how you get chemical A transformed to chemical B. And for 15 years, I've been showing this little serotonin slide, is what I call it. It's an abridged part of tryptophan metabolism, and lay audiences get it. It's very simple. First of all, you folks know that this is very simple. It's oversimplified. It's a tiny little corner of tryptophan metabolism, and it doesn't show everything. But just simplifying it, every arrow is an enzyme. 3 chemicals, tryptophan, serotonin, and melatonin, are in red only because lay audiences recognize those words. And so you can click on every enzyme on the internet and ask which cofactors are required for optimal speed and efficiency of that enzymatic reaction. So here we have iron, phosphorus, and calcium. Here we have vitamin B6, 2 B vitamins and iron, B6 over here, 2 B vitamins and molybdenum, which most people haven't even heard of, zinc, and on it goes. So there are a couple of things to learn from this slide. First of all, our brain needs a lot of micronutrients in order to work this and work optimally. And the second thing is, I can't understand how anybody on a grant review committee would look at anything like this or have been trained in the biochemistry of what goes on in brain metabolism and say, oh yes, let's only fund research.
No, I just transferred everything.
I'm sorry.
Shiva, please mute your microphone. There's some people out there that haven't muted yet. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thanks. So I was just saying, how can you look at this? And if you're on a grant review committee, how can you make the decision to fund only single nutrient research? But that's what has been done. And so some of my American colleagues who submitted clinical trial proposals to NIMH and gotten spectacular feedback and told, just stop looking at a spectrum of nutrients and send this back to us with just one nutrient, so now we know how funding agencies work, but it ain't the way the brain works. And of course, if you look at the single nutrient research, as I've done back to the 1920s, it's sad how much taxpayer money has gone to this completely useless approach. So just to continue this theme, I don't want you to think it's just relevant to tryptophan. I'm sure you know it isn't. This is a small portion of the dopamine pathway, which my colleague at Oregon Health and Sciences University, Dr. Jenny Johnstone, put together, same concept. And then I think that some of the people I'm speaking to are real mitochondrial experts, and you know that there are a lot of micronutrients that are required for all the steps of the electron transport chain, et cetera. So the role of micronutrients in the brain is not a mystery. And I hope nobody, again, ever says to me, those vitamins and minerals you're studying, they're not relevant for the brain, are they? Because I think I will have a little bit of a meltdown. We have to educate everyone about the importance of nutrients as cofactors. Now, I haven't gone into mitochondrial function or inflammation, but we have natural mechanisms which are nutrient dependent to make sure all of these things work. And my colleagues and I wrote a paper a few years ago to try to explain how they all fit together, because it seemed to me that there was a tendency in the literature to people say, well, that's relevant for brain metabolism, but it's not relevant for inflammation. Well, they don't get how these things interact. So we put that together. So I think at this point, I just want to say again, it's difficult for me anyway to see why we could ever expect a single nutrient to have a major effect on mental health. Excuse me. Scurvy and the frank deficiency diseases that were really sorted out decades ago, those are single nutrient problems, but the brain is much, much more complex. And it's even more complex than the literature I'm going to be going over because, for example, if you look at the foods in this picture, you know that none of these are single nutrient foods. Every time you eat a whole food, you're getting a variety of nutrients that are working together. And it's not just the micronutrients and the omega-3 fatty acids. It's also, some people say there are over 1,000 phytonutrients, many of which we just don't even know yet what they do. But there must be a reason that they are packaged together with all of these other wonderful nutrients in our whole foods. Now I want to turn to our current international experiment. And it involves understanding that processing of foods is on a continuum. You recognize that everything in this picture is a whole food. And you probably know what an ultra-processed product is. I refuse to call them, the literature is calling them UPFs lately, ultra-processed foods. That bothers me because food is what is needed to grow, develop, sustain, maintain ourselves. And these ultra processed things that are in packages that are taking up 80% of our grocery stores because we as a society keep demanding them, they're not food, but they are ultra processed products, mostly chemicals. And I mean, they certainly have the macronutrients, right? They got the fats, not the good fats. They've got the carbs, not the good carbs. They've got some protein if it's appropriate for that product, but They have so few micronutrients that even when they list in Canada, usually they list about 5 of them, and they're usually mostly 0. And that's just 5. And I mean, there are roughly 30 vitamins and minerals alone that we should be consuming every day. So the international experiment is that people are moving along the continuum from whole foods, which is how our ancestors ate, to the ultra processed. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that there are some kinds of processing kind of in the middle of that continuum, which are quite healthy and in fact have helped people diversify their diets. So if I pick up a bag of frozen peas that has nothing in it but frozen peas, that would be a processed food because it's been frozen. But they were probably flash frozen right after harvest, and they're probably quite good for me. And even a jar of applesauce that might have a little bit of a preservative, it's still, maybe it's not as good as eating whole apples, but it's better than the real ultra processed stuff. So you know what this is. This is what our society is eating, ultra processed. I don't see much of anything on here except a little bit of protein from the hamburger and whatever you get from one leaf of lettuce. And this is the way we want our society to be eating. And this is kind of a Mediterranean style of diet. I'll just point out that this is fruits and vegetables, eat fish twice a week, lean meats if you're not a vegetarian, these items if you're not a vegan, whole grains for your grains and breads and so forth, olive oil whenever you can, snacking on nuts and seeds. And this, as we'll talk about later, is where you can really save a lot of money and diversify your diet, which are the beans and legumes. So what is this experiment I keep referring to? This is the most horrible data, upsetting data that I've read in many, many years. So you probably all know what NHANES is, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that the US has been doing since, well, for 50 years, since 1971. And they keep track of a lot of aspects of America's nutrition, and lots of different scientists have access to the data, and so they analyze that data. And these 2 articles have appeared in the last 2 or 3 months, and it's horrific. What it says is that 2/3 of the caloric intake of young Americans aged 2 to 19 years is ultra processed, meaning, I mean, the way I hear that is nutrient free, micronutrient free. They just have cut out micronutrients, vitamins and minerals from 2/3 of their diet. For adults over 19 years, it's still 57%. This is shocking. Nutrition, as we know, is the foundation of our physical and mental resilience. So we need to ask what happens to people whose nutrient intake, I should have said micronutrient intake there, is 50% of what it should or could be. Well, it turns out we know. 70 years ago, and this should be in the public knowledge, 70 years ago, there was a series of studies at the University of Minnesota after World War II called the starvation experiments. I'm not familiar with the ones on physical health, but this is the one I'm citing here covered some mental health variables. They had 36 normal healthy men who agreed to volunteer to be put onto a diet for 6 months, which was 50% of their normal caloric and nutrient intake. Now you will immediately notice that this is not what our population is doing. We are getting plenty of calories, but we're getting only half of the micronutrients. So we have an obese, well, for lots of reasons, we have an obese population who are not getting those vitamins and minerals. What can we expect? Well, according to their studies, we can expect depression. Hysteria is kind of an old name from the 1950s. Now they might be diagnosed with hypomania or anxiety disorders, irritability, self-harm, we would call this, apathy, a symptom of depression, social withdrawal, depression, inability to concentrate, a symptom of ADHD. So what you have on this slide is 70-year-old proof that if you can cut people's micronutrient intake by 50%, you will see all the symptoms of depression, anxiety, and some of ADHD. And I think anybody who works with starving populations who are displaced due to war, etc., will tell you they see the same thing. Everyone's quite familiar with it, but somehow we are not teaching our societies about this, and we need to. In this same period of time, a couple of other things have been happening. This is from, some of you might recognize the name E. Fuller Torrey. He's one of your American leading psychiatrists, and he published a book in 2001 called The Invisible Plague, because he and his co-author, Judy Miller, were appalled to discover that the prevalence rate of diagnosed mental illness had tripled from 0.01% to 0.03% in 1960. Now the World Health Organization says it's 20%. Well, what are some of the things that have happened between 1960 and now? Certainly the diet has changed a lot. We are now, as I showed you, eating food that is not real food. Another thing that's happened that's worth commenting on is that this is the psychopharmacology revolution. And the psychiatric meds are obviously, they help some people, but obviously they aren't doing enough, or we wouldn't have this exponential growth in mental disorders. And by the way, there is a whole literature on dementia and antipsychotic medication, I imagine some of you are familiar with. I need to turn to the scientific evidence linking nutrition to mental health disorders. And I will mention a few studies on dementia, but I think many of you in the audience know a lot more than I do. So I'm leery about trying to go into that in too much depth. And again, I'm doing this from a clinical research perspective. I tend to think about the research in 4 categories: correlational, prospective, longitudinal, and then 2 kinds of treatment studies. And to me, it's all of a package, and the package together shows that the weight of the evidence shows how important nutrition is for optimal brain function. So just briefly, the correlational data, I'm not going to go through the studies because there are too many of them, but they're from Australia and Belgium and Spain and Canada. And I don't think any of these are from the US, but they're population health studies, and they have all asked the question whether a Mediterranean style whole foods kind of diet is different from a Western processed foods diet in terms of mental health. And this is what they've all found, that the whole foods diet is associated with lower rates of mood and anxiety symptoms, and the Western diet is associated with higher rates of mood and anxiety symptoms. Now, I'm not going to go into those studies anymore, but I'm hoping you're thinking critically about the fact that this proves nothing. Correlational epidemiologic studies are good for clues that then have to really be studied, because we don't know what's cause and what's effect. And I think the arrow goes both ways, but I think that's what I'll show you in a moment. But the question is, are whole foods, the lack of whole foods causing mood and anxiety symptoms, or are people who are depressed more likely to choose, processed food? And obviously that's true. I've never seen a depressed person craving broccoli. So to determine the direction of causality, we need prospective longitudinal data, and there aren't as many studies because they're harder to do, they're long-term, they're more expensive, and there are several that I usually cite, but I've just selected one because I need to, for this talk, I need to go on to other topics. But I selected one that was published in a major journal, the Pediatrics, which is the American Society of Pediatrics, and was carried out in Canada, though. And it was in children. And I spent the last part of my career in a pediatrics department. So I am always asking, what are we doing to our children? And it ain't pretty, in my opinion. So these were children aged 10 to 11 years old. They were evaluated in the year 2011 for their dietary intake. And also they had 6 variables related to dietary intake, but they also had 3 variables related to the amount of time they were in front of screens and their physical activity. So they had 9 health recommendations from various societies of pediatrics. And they asked the question, if we divide them according to how many health recommendations a child is following, what do we find out about their mental health problems 2 years on? Because they had no mental health conditions at the time they did that baseline evaluation. So they came back in 2 years, and the senior author on this, Paul Voiglers from University of Alberta, gave me this it's a bit of a cartoon drawing to put it in the So you notice there are no numbers on the y-axis, but what it shows is that children who were following 7 to 9 of those health behaviors, they were protected. There was a 56% reduction in the number of them who were referred to a physician for problems with their behavior or mental health. Even 4 to 6 of the recommendations, there was a 39% reduction. Then they did a multiple regression analysis, and they showed that for every additional recommendation that was met in any given child, there were 15% fewer physician visits for diagnosis and treatment of a mental health problem. That's enormous, and it's enormous in terms of our healthcare budget too. That's why I put the dollar signs on there. But I need to go on to the third kind of data, which is treatment with whole of diet. Just like the prospective longitudinal studies, these are expensive and long to do, and so there aren't that many of the studies. I don't have all of them on here, but I put on 3 that were very, very similar so I can group their data together. These were 3 studies all done actually in Australia, not that that's important because there are 3 completely independent laboratories, and they were all in adults with depression, and they required that the adults who had depressive symptoms were also consuming a relatively poor processed diet. All of them were randomized trials. People were randomized to receive anywhere from 3 to 12 weeks of either education about a whole foods diet or some comparison group like social support or counseling. And this is what they found. Oh, by the way, this is the diet, of course, they were generally eating when they came in. And this is what they were taught to eat. So the combined results of these 3 studies is that improved diet resulted in decreased depression and, of course, no side effects. That's huge in the psychiatric literature, right? I mean, side effects, I get asked that all the time. What are the side effects of nutrition? And I say, well, better sleep, more energy, better bowel movements, those are the side effects of better nutrition. But people who have spent their lives prescribing psychiatric medication just can't quite believe that. Anyway, the improved diet, the more improved the diet, the more compliant people were to following an improved diet, the better the improvement in symptoms. And the most of the 2 of the 3 were 10 to 12 weeks, but the Francis et al. Study was really important because they did not do person-to-person education. They did it with an online educational video, and they got a 25% decrease in depression in 3 weeks, which has big public health implications, in my opinion. But I want to talk about Felice Jacka's study because there were 2 enormously important findings there. First of all, 8% of those who received peer counseling went into remission. That means they didn't just get better, they no longer met criteria for depression. So when you think about psychotherapy, or you think about just being a friend and supporting someone who's struggling with depression, don't trivialize the importance of that. We have to keep that in mind, that interpersonal support is very effective for many people. But of course, I wouldn't be showing you this if it hadn't been really astounding that 1/3 of those who received, that should really say dietary education and counseling, 1/3 of those went into remission in 12 weeks. And I have never heard of an antidepressant medication that can do this, and especially with no side effects. If you ever hear of a 1/3 remission rate, they're usually struggling to get a 3-point change on the Hamilton Depression Scale. So it's pretty impressive what you can do with diet. The second really important thing about that study is that they did a financial analysis. We have this myth out there. All the time I speak to clinicians and they say, my patients simply cannot afford to eat a whole foods diet. And every single time I challenge them, and now I show them, sorry, I went forward. I don't know why, I can't seem to go back today. Well, oh dear, now I'm going too far. Sorry, I have to pause for a moment and figure out why I can't go backwards. Now I can, and I'm using the same backward arrow. Go figure. Okay. What the Jacka et al. Trial did was quantify how much a person was spending, that's in Australian dollars, per week prior to learning about a whole foods diet, and then how much they were spending when they were eating a whole foods diet, and they were saving 20% on their budget. You have to keep in mind, they were not being taught to eat lobster and steak every week. They were being taught economical ways to eat a whole foods diet. And eating highly processed food is not cheap. Eating from vending machines, as some people do, or from corner stores, really adds up. And so I know some clinicians here in Calgary, where I live, who've had their clients keep track of how much they are saving. And they all save money when they go on to a foods diet. This is what I call the secret sauce in the Mediterranean style diet. Lentils, I mean, there are people who are working 2 jobs. They don't have time or the organizational skills or whatever to cook with a lot of the things that require soaking overnight or using an Instapot or something. But something like lentils once or twice a week, that's fast. They cook in a half hour or less if you use the smaller lentils. And the diversity is phenomenal. And when people, I tell people, just go put in the words recipe lentils, and they're astounded. You can, I'm sorry, I should have said in a browser, in a search engine like Google, and they're astounded when they get like 7 million recipes in less than 1 second. So people can gradually improve the health of their diets and can also save money. So I feel as if this talk today is unusually broad because I'm just aware that I have an audience that differs from many of the ones that I talk to. So I put in a little interim summary on what I've covered so far. It's been known for 70 years that cutting our micronutrient intake in half results in depression, anxiety, and inattention. Americans have already eliminated more than half of their micronutrient intake. Is it any surprise that we have 20% point prevalence of mental disorders? And by the way, I didn't put on that slide or anywhere, but I should tell you that the World Health Organization says that our current lifetime prevalence is 50%. 1 in 2 of us will develop a mental disorder at some point in our lifetime. There's something really wrong with that. The third thing we talked about is epidemic of mental health problems. Here I put the 50% lifetime prevalence. Pardon me, I didn't remember I'd done that. In spite of conventional care. I mentioned there are over 12, 15 correlational studies showing an association between our dietary pattern and our mental health. There are predictive studies showing that a better diet is a protective factor. I didn't put in the suicide study, but there's an amazing one in British Journal of Psychiatry from Japan showing a 50% protective factor for suicide in people tracked for 10 years who are eating a whole foods kind of diet. That should be in a lot of treatment centers, I would think, and mental health diagnoses. Nutrition education results in better treatment effects than any antidepressant medication ever. And that's in 3 independent studies, probably more than that now. A whole foods diet can save people money as much as 20% of your budget. And a whole foods diet can save the healthcare budget a lot of money. If we have time, I'll talk about 2 case studies that we have studied extensively with health economists. And it's in the 4th type of data where we show that over 90% of the cost of their conventional psychiatric care disappeared, and they were sustained on less than 10% just using micronutrients. So there's a lot of cost savings reasons to look at nutrition and mental health. So now we can go on to the 4th of the 4 kinds of data. This is the research on broad spectrum micronutrients in pill form. I hope you'll understand why I'm not covering any of the single micronutrients, because vitamin D doesn't fix depression and because magnesium does not fix anxiety. I mean, all of these nutrients and the B vitamins, so important for brain health, they're all beneficial, but they don't have the impact of a broad spectrum micronutrient. So what about people who already eat a really healthy whole foods diet? Is nutrition relevant for them? Again, in our book, we have a half of a chapter on the microbiome of our soil. and how the nutrient density of our food is of great concern. I won't go into it here, but in addition, there's another reason why eating a healthy whole foods diet might not be sufficient for many people. And that really boils down to individual differences. We know that some people have a congenital need for more than the typical amount of cofactors for optimal enzymatic activity. Bruce Ames summarized approximately 50 of those in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition 20 years ago. He was focused only on vitamins and also only on physical symptoms. But we think probably it's a model for what's going on in mental health. And that is that some people have inherited the need for an unusual amount of cofactors. In that regard, I'd like to point out that I get asked all the time by clinicians, well, can't we just test? You know, we can test peripheral blood for a lot of micronutrients, as you all know, but we cannot test what is optimal for you or optimal for me. There simply is no test on what an individual brain requires for optimal function. And I don't know if we'll have that in my lifetime. But, you know, Linus Pauling was a very smart guy. And he was talking in the 1960s about what is it that's inherited in mental illness, because we've all known families where depression runs in the family or anxiety runs in the family, etc. And what he said, I think, was probably right on, but we don't have the proof for this yet. What is probably inherited in mental illness are genes that regulate brain metabolism of the essential nutrients. And that fits with our research because all of us who've been doing studies on micronutrients, broad spectrum ones in pill form, have seen people who have very good whole foods diets. And that doesn't mean they never eat a cookie, but you know, they eat a whole foods kind of diet. And yet when they take a broad spectrum micronutrient formula, some of them still do get better in terms of mental health, and they report better energy, etc. Now, I saved this fourth category for last, partly because it's the one I think I know the most about. It's what I worked in, but also because of the large number of studies. I can't go over all of them for you, so I've tried to lump them together a little bit. Now, I said there are a lot of single nutrient studies. They're not included in this 60, and I'm just not, if you want to review some of them, we wrote a Psych Bulletin review article in 2007 about them. They just have modest effects. So let's ignore them. There's some very interesting studies using what I call the favorite few. You'll have a scientist who has a particular interest in one brain pathway in particular, and they'll test a group of nutrients. And usually it'll be 4, 5, maybe 6, but not 30. And most of those studies are simply useless. They just don't have much of an impact on mental health. The exception is B complex, and I'll come back to that. But then the ones that really look at the way we consume minerals and vitamins, you know, from plants, which is roughly 15 of each, minerals and vitamins, those are the ones that are showing moderate to large effect sizes. So this is a summary slide because I can't go over that many studies with you. Just want you to know all the different things that have been studied. And when it says something like addiction to positive randomized controlled trials, it means that.
Please hold and someone will assist you momentarily.
I'm sorry, we're having a problem with feedback. Could everybody mute their mics again? Something is going wrong. So if you look at these, then the way to read it is that there were 2 randomized controlled trials, and both of them showed benefit of broad spectrum micronutrients. But this is what I've highlighted here is probably the most important thing for you to take away from these 50-some studies. These have been done, by the way, mostly in New Zealand, Canada, and US. There are a few European studies here too. And the common theme across.
Hi, I got a call from this number.
I'm sorry, could Jacqueline mute her mic? I think that's the one coming through. Okay. The common theme is across all of the DSM diagnostic categories is that people are better able to self-regulate. That means lowering irritability, managing their anger. They might still get frustrated, but they don't have meltdowns. There's less explosive rage. It's self-regulation. And that's been true across all the laboratories and all the diagnoses. Nutrition is the foundation of mental and physical resilience. And right now we have COVID. And so I wanted to say something about that. And I'm going to do it with another summary slide. This one was put together by Julia Ruckledge, who we were talking about before, my co-author on The Better Brain and my former student. And we have a chapter in the book on the earthquake, flood, and massacre data. And if anyone is particularly interested, it's very amazing. Given what's going on with all the hurricanes and floods and everything, people need to learn about this. That is that you can decrease the amount of post-traumatic stress kinds of symptoms, and you can help people recover mentally more rapidly. We've shown it with the earthquakes in New Zealand and the flood in Alberta, and then the massacres in the mosques in New Zealand again. So this summary slide, we use the DASS, which is the Depression, Anxiety, and Stress Scale across all the studies. And this horizontal black line indicates what's normal and what's abnormal. So this is a high level of stress above the line, and we want to get them down to a lower level. And as you can see, overall, we have very large effect sizes, always in 4 to 6 weeks. So this is the first earthquake that happened. No, it isn't. Sorry, second earthquake that happened in 2011 in New Zealand. This is the flood that happened in southern Alberta, which it was amazing to me that we had virtually identical results, because the earthquakes there were 8,000 earthquakes and aftershocks in Christchurch, and we had 1 day of a flood, but we had very parallel results. This is the massacre in the mosques. This is the earthquake comparator. These are the earthquake and flood were both randomized controlled trials, and the earthquake comparator was treatment as usual. And as you can see, they did not get out, down into the normal level of depression, anxiety, and stress. This is the flood comparator, which was vitamin D. And I wanted to say something about B complex. So what I showed you on the previous slide, the green line was the broad spectrum formula with roughly 30 micronutrients. The red was B complex and was not shown on this previous slide. And in this well-nourished population that had not just had 8,000 earthquakes and aftershocks, but very stressed, they did not have diagnoses of anxiety disorders. Just B complex was really improved their resilience, is the way I would look at that. But the comparator of vitamin D did not. So one other summary slide. This is a summary of 3 randomized controlled trials in children with ADHD. And let me tell you the bottom line again. The bottom line is, yes, the symptoms of ADHD got better when they broke the blind. The micronutrient groups in all 3 studies were significantly better than the placebo group. We always get a big placebo effect when you give children large capsules. But the symptoms that were most treatable across all 3 studies were the dysregulation symptoms, those associated with impulsive rage, meltdowns, irritability, etc. And this says % improved. It really should say the responders. Here it says responders, which meant that they were not just a little improved, but they met criteria for moderate to significant improvement on the Clinical Global Index Improvement Scale. These were done in New Zealand. They're Julia Ruckledge's work, adults here, children here. And this one was a recent replication, the Maddie trial run between the US and Canada. And that was run by Dr. Jenny Johnstone. The unsung hero for general public health is the benefit of B complex alone, which I think some of the people in this audience are not surprised about. B complex is very important for brain health and for a stressed, like people who are going into exams in university, but they don't have a diagnosis. You're not going to treat an anxiety disorder successfully with B complex. I've never even heard anecdotal evidence of that. But for improving resilience to stressors that come our way, B vitamins are very useful. I wanted to just quickly say that I think dementia researchers get this better than psychiatrists do, but dementia researchers have been doing things like the MIND diet. This is the late Martha Claire Morris's work, longitudinal research showing 50% decrease in risk of dementia in those who follow the MIND diet most closely. The VitaCog trial, I'm sure you're familiar with, high dose B vitamins, and those with high homocysteine levels who were randomized to the B vitamin group had 1/7 the brain shrinkage as the placebo group. And then this came out, I think, just last week, January 11th, of a group from Ben Gurion University in Israel, where they compared health following healthy dietary guidelines. People were randomized to these, to a Mediterranean kind of diet, to a Mediterranean diet that was higher in polyphenols and lower in red and processed meat. And they looked at MRI measures of volume, especially hippocampal. And their third group, the green med group, also got green tea, green shakes, and something I had never heard of before, but it's a source of polyphenols, Mankai. And group 3 was superior in terms of neuroprotection. So you might want to take a look at that if you haven't read it yet. I'm going to end by talking to obstacles to progress. The public and physicians tend to dismiss the importance of micronutrients. I've often said I wished I were studying something sexier than vitamins and minerals, because the adjective people use for vitamins, now it kind of blows me away, but they'd say, oh, it's just vitamins. How to trivialize something that we're built out of. And it's also very hard to influence policy when the media doesn't cover any of the research. They are not interested in nutrients in pill form. And instead, they bombard the public with articles and titles like this. Could vitamins be killing you? No, they don't. Too much vitamin D can kill you. I mean, you have to be ridiculous and swallow a carton of it. Popular but dangerous. Don't take your vitamins. Your multivitamin may be killing you, etc., etc., etc. I mean, this is what our media says to us all the time. And our policymakers at the federal level aren't of much better help. My colleague at the University of Toronto, Richard Bazinet, shared with me 2 slides. He did a search of the Canada's food guide and searched for heart or cardio and got 62 hits for each one. So obviously our policymakers are paying attention to the heart and cardiometabolic problems. And then he did a search for brain or neuro, not a single mention. Our policymakers are not paying attention to the role of nutrition in brain health. What should we be doing? I think we should be teaching people why nutrients are important. That's what really drove us to write our book for the general public, because we don't think that the other nutrition books out there ever tell people what they're doing when they eat a better diet, how they're helping their brain. And children can understand it too. Chapter 2 in our book, we give the diagram of the serotonin pathway. Anybody can understand that. What should our policymakers be doing? Lots of things. I think that every single mental health clinic should provide nutrition education at the time of first referral. It should be pre-treatment for everyone, teaching people to eat better. And I have a few other suggestions there. I assume you'll have access to my slides, and here are 3 articles you might want to look at. One is for mental health clinicians. One focuses on the massacre, earthquakes, and floods. And another is a recent systematic review. And once again, I'll just conclude with my website. If you want to contact me individually, you can do so through there. Just be sure to get the J in my name. And I think I've left at least 5-10 minutes for questions, Dr. Albensi.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Bonnie. That was very interesting. Great presentation. While people are formulating their questions, I'm just going to ask you a quick question. So
Sure.
you mentioned you had a favorite few. And one of your favorite few was B complex. So could you further elaborate on what some of your other favorite few are while people are coming to creating the questions?
Yeah, I don't have a favorite few. I use that in an accusatory tone about funding agencies and some of my research colleagues, because there was one study recently. Oh, I think I happen to have this open on my screen. I'm going to read you the title. Hold on one second. No, I guess it went away. Okay, sorry. Anyway, a group from a variety of institutions got together and decided that they knew which nutrients would help. And I've totally lost the picture of you. There you are. Which nutrients would be useful for mental disorders? They selected a group of maybe 5 nutrients and got a lot of money to do the study in people with depression and bipolar, as I recall. And then when they got no effect, no exciting effect, because it wasn't a random few, but it was very incomplete. They subtitled their article, "Why More is Not Merrier." Well, those of us who study the broad spectrum of all 30 vitamins and minerals that we know of that the brain uses every minute of every day think that more might be merrier. So that was a little bit annoying. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Very good. So I think people are still formulating their questions. I have one question here, but before I read this question, I just want to let everyone know that we did attempt to record the session today, and I'll post a recording link on my social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, in case you came late and weren't able to watch the whole thing. So that recording link will be available later today. So the first question that came in is from Dr. Milliken in Winnipeg. Could you comment on any research available on the WALS protocol, WAHL, WALS protocol for MS?
Yeah, I have Terry Walls's book, and she's really quite an amazing woman. But I think I'm going to decline commenting because I'm not knowledgeable enough about any of the physical illnesses. I think that there's a lot of similarity in terms of whole foods, but I think she also excludes wheat and dairy and so forth. And there's, I think, mixed data on that.
Okay. I see another question in the chat box. What do you think about commercial multivitamin pills?
Yeah. You know, Julia had one of her students do a very good publication on this. So the person who's writing about that, if you drop me a note by my website, I'll send you the article. She went to a grocery store and pulled off every single multivitamin that was there and compared, I think she picked about 4 vitamins and compared the quantities to all the research formulas for which there was evidence of benefit for mental health problems. And the difference is astonishing. The multivitamins that you buy in the grocery store, there's nothing wrong with them. I'm not saying that, but they are of such trivial doses. They're all way below RDA. And RDA, you have to know that RDAs were set after World War II, basically to make sure that our soldiers were healthy enough to march, and looking only at physical health. I mean, there are no known RDA kinds of things based on brain function. And so everything in the multi-nutrient formulas that have been subjected to research are below the tolerable upper levels, below toxicity, et cetera. And we've published tons of data on long-term safety. We have never seen a significant adverse event from any one of them, but they are higher dose than what you get in the grocery store. Chapter 11 of our book actually goes through all of the formulas in the world for which there is good objective, not funded by the companies, objective data of an impact on mental health.
Okay, here's the question from Dr. Sue at St. Boniface. Hi, Dr. Sue. How are you?
Good.
It says, does under versus overnutrition affect differently to mental health?
Well, that's a I've never been asked that question before. That's a really interesting question. I think by overnutrition, Dr. Sue, you're really thinking about people who are eating a lot, but not necessarily too much of the minerals and vitamins, right? So, I mean, the overnutrition problem that we're suffering from in North America is that people are getting, as I said, the wrong fats, the wrong carbs. They're eating too much of empty calorie junk food. I don't usually use the word junk, but it is junk food, and they're not feeding their brains. So yeah, there's a big difference. Now, in addition, I don't know how many of you know Dr. Robert Lustig from University of California in San Francisco, who's a major contributor to understanding the role of sugar and endocrinology on cardiometabolic disease. And I heard him say in a podcast yesterday, but I haven't read the article yet, that he feels they have really found not only are the ultra processed foods bad for us because they're replacing foods with nutrients, but that they have final proof on what it is in those highly sugared products, which are actually toxic. And he mentioned a chemical I wasn't familiar with, so I didn't store it. So I think we're still learning about what the overnutrition, when it consists of a lot of that sugar, what it's doing to our brains. I don't know if I answered your question, Dr.
Well,
Sue, but I rambled on.
Yeah, well, in North America, that it's undernutrition is not big issue. It's overnutrition is always the issue. And when you have overeating, then it's the neurotransmitters, it's changing as well. And in that, whether that's connected with disease, mental health issues or not. So in terms of when you recommend, micronutrients, mixture of the micronutrient, I agree that, because when you say that it's a metabolism, you intake any nutrients, it's not only one single nutrient metabolize its own. So it's an integrated metabolism happening. So one single nutrient doesn't help, and it's a mixture. So I absolutely agree with the way that you recommend. But overnutrition is the issue in North America, and that changes with the building up the adipose tissue in the body. Adipose tissue, produce leptins and so on, that related with appetite, and whether that's another impacting on the brain signals and the mental health issues. So I don't know the connection is it, but
that's what exactly. Pardon me. I didn't mean to talk over you, Dr. Sue. Go ahead if I interrupted.
Oh, no, that's okay. Okay, go ahead.
So, sorry, I thought you had paused there. Dr. Lustig's work apparently is the first recent breakthrough in understanding what the excess sugar is actually the toxic effect in the brain. I'm going to suggest that you not use the word overnutrition when talking about this. It's overeating.
Yeah, overeating, sorry, yes.
But my colleague Julia Ruckledge one day said in a talk, she said, you look at most of the packaged foods, and probably people would be better off just eating the package, because at least they'd be getting some fiber from the cardboard, because they're not getting the micronutrients, they're not getting the healthy fats or carbs or anything. So that's why I think we should be calling it overeating. And I see, is that you asked one other question, do clinics prescribe healthy foods as a treatment?
Yeah.
Well, that's the future that we all hope for, but I don't see it happening yet. We wrote this book to educate the general public, and because my goal is not to sell books, my goal is to change mental health treatment. And anybody on this call has good relationships with people who make policies and would like to introduce me to them, I'm happy to talk to people, and I'm reaching out to politicians and people in the mental health world to try to get them to pre-treat every referral with education about whole foods versus the chemicals that they're filling their stomachs with, and also about micronutrients in pill form, everything about nutrition. That should happen before people, especially children, have their developing brains exposed to psychiatric medication. It's what we owe our children to first treat them that way. I skipped over one question, Ben.
Yeah, there's one question from Dr. Adlimigadam in St. Boniface, and I think we only have time for this last question. I have to actually go. Can high vitamin B cause kidney problems?
Is there a nephrologist in the audience? I'm not one. But you know, we're always giving these things in balance and at below the tolerable upper levels. So I don't know what harms can be done. I imagine if you go above the UL, it's possible. I just don't know. Anyone want to answer? No, okay.
You know, I did have one other quick question. So
Okay.
both you and I have lived in the US and Canada for a significant number of time, and you mentioned the RDA earlier. Have you ever
Yes.
seen huge differences in any specific aspects of the RDA in Canada versus the US? Are
Well,
they
what
all
is,
pretty similar?
yeah, they're very similar, but in Canada, they're called the RNI.
Okay,
Because we have to have our
Right.
own name for everything.
right. Okay, okay, very good. Well, thank you again for your time today. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm going to have to read your book once I get it. I ordered it on Amazon, so thanks for that. And if there are any other follow-up questions, I'm going to refer them to your email. And it's great seeing you again, Bonnie.
Same here, Ben. Take care.
Maybe we'll see you in Winnipeg at one of Harvey's meetings again once if that resumes. And I think Harvey's out there today. So
I just saw
big
his
shout out
name.
to Harvey.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Thank
Okay,
you,
thank you.
everybody. Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.